Hello, everybody, and welcome to lesson 4 of class, a simplistic way of paying attention to understand. Now, before we get into everything, I want to tap on lesson 3, seeing in between. And one of the things we talked about was nonverbal versus verbal communication and looking at things differently. For instance, haven't you ever noticed that your heart, or at least the symbol of a heart, doesn't necessarily look like an actual heart? So what does it look like? Well, if I were to go ahead and if you've seen my other video, draw a teardrop like this and draw another one next to it. Remember lesson 1, perspective and perception. If I were to flip these now, I would get something that looked like this, and I would get something else that looked like this. When I push them together, you can see that they kind of make the symbol of a heart if you were to draw a line down in between. Now, this is very interesting to people like me because of the fact that, well, a broken heart can bring tears to an individual. So if you are paying attention and you are seeing in between and you've learned from lessons 1, 2, and 3, you're already primed for lesson 4. Now, when it comes to seeing in between, one of the things I want you guys to focus on, especially if you saw lesson 3, was how one line can literally turn a negative into a positive. And what I mean by that is, if we were to draw a subtraction symbol, right, or a negative symbol that looks like this, one line, literally, if I were to do the same thing here, can turn it into a positive. Now, shifting your perspective, right, we can tilt this, and now it would make a multiplication symbol. You know, most people should say, most people would say, oh, you shouldn't add, subtract, or multiply, but it's simple arithmetic. And I mean, if your day's going bad, why not turn it into a positive one by looking for different opportunities and then capitalize on that by multiplying the thing that made you happy or turned your day around, right? So these are some things that I want you to pay attention to when it comes to lesson 4. Now, getting into lesson 4 and seeing in between and putting everything together. A simplistic way to pay attention to understand is, well, making things stand out and be a little bit more obvious. So this right here is called a kunai or karambit, so on and so forth. If it was bigger and shaped differently, it would be called a kunai. This would be a cool knife or whatever the case, kind of looks like a comma, so on and so forth. It goes around my finger, so on and so forth, so I could flip it around and things like that. However, because I'm a martial artist with over 20 years of experience, I've learned that your weapon is supposed to be an extension of your body. And in order to have a weapon be an extension of your body, you have to give it meaning. So for me, that karambit is actually titled a pika. And so when I looked into the definitions and I looked into the meaning of the word pika and I broke it up, well, I came up with something very interesting. So if I were to split it in half, right, because it's spelled P-I-K-A, but I'm going to split it in half here. Now, on the periodic table, pi or pi, right, they got rid of the I due to the fact that pi was around. That was 3.14, so on and so forth in mathematics. And they just left it as a regular P. This would stand for your Archimedes constant if it was pi, or phosphorus if you're looking at the periodic table. Now, if you're looking at K and A, they dropped the A, just like they dropped the I, and they left it as K. And now K is actually potassium. And if you study botany, within botany, potassium and phosphorus are both utilized as macronutrients when it comes to replenishing things like soil, having effects on battery and energy storage and things like that, replacing lithium-ion batteries and things like that. So you have to understand that there's just more than one meaning to something, and if you give it more meaning, it's going to be more meaningful to you. Therefore, it brings more value to you. Therefore, you're more inclined to spend time with it, just like people around you. So these are some of the things that I want to get into when you're paying attention to understand. Actually understand everything and try to see things from more than just what they are. Most people must have saw the knife and literally said, whoa, what is this guy doing on video? But I got your attention, right? Because that's where I needed you to pay attention. Now, what I was explaining afterwards when I was talking about botany, such as, let's say, soil was damaged because it got, touched by radiation, you can utilize potassium and phosphorus to go ahead and re-neutralize the soil or re-mineralize the soil so that it's more useful again, and then it could strengthen things like crops, agriculture, and things like that, and mitigate a lot of the things that would come from this. If you wanted to apply it in other places, such as energy and batteries, you can do so as well. So when it comes to understanding, you have to be able to think like a librarian, as they say, or think as an eccentric thinker or a big thinker, right? Don't just stay in your little box and say, oh, he's wearing a black shirt with the word hustle on it. Because if I come closer and I lift up my shirt, just like in the other class, I said that there was a lot of ways to say a word. And this is a word cloud demonstrated by a couple graphic artists that not only spells the word hustle, but there are many ways to hustle. And that's what's exactly the words that make up the word on the shirt. So it's like an entendre, right? And so if you see my other videos, you know I like to play with entendre because entendres have more than just one meaning with one word. So you're able to speak to many different people. Similarly to music, right? See, music is interesting because just like music has a measure similar to the way we measure in America. So you have a half note, a quarter note, a 16th or a half beat, so on and so forth, etc. There's other terminologies in there. And so what I want to talk about is things like music. What can music do? Well, first of all, music carries a frequency. And that frequency kind of looks like a wavelength, so on and so forth. And if I were to cut this wavelength in half, so on and so forth, I could get two W's, right? Or if I were to mix it up a little bit and switch the wavelength, right? I could go ahead and now cut this one in half, have this one keep going, and I would get a W and an M. So it really matters when it comes to your perspective and the way you're seeing the world and society. Now, when it comes to other terms utilized in music, you have what's called a vibe, right? And in English language today, they say, oh, I don't like your vibe, or yo, don't kill my vibe, right? This is the empaths, as they say, that they pick up on people's energy, right? And that energy is otherwise dictated as a vibe. So that's something that you want to understand when you're communicating with somebody and they use terminology that you don't understand. Ask them a question like, well, what do you mean by vibe? Like, oh, I just feel like you're giving off this energy, so on and so forth, etc. So I want to go ahead and develop that a little bit with you because most people will say it's not what you say, it's how you say it. But then again, in businesses, you don't get paid for what you do, you get paid for how you do it. So when we're talking about things like this, we want to mention things like pitch, right? And now pitch is very interesting because this is your volume, how high, how low you're speaking, so on and so forth. It has many other facets and characteristics. I've never claimed to be a musician, so I'll let you guys run with this as well. However, even a pitcher and catcher can catch a pitch if you're picking up on a sports analogy, right? Because a pitch is different, right? How fast, how hard, how high can you go, right? And then, of course, you have your tone, right? Or as they say, setting the tone in the room or changing your tone, so on and so forth. And when you combine all these things, when you have the right tone and you walk into the room and you say the right thing because you delivered with the right pitch, as they also utilize in business on Shark Tank, give me your best pitch, right? And then, of course, when you walk in, you want to walk in with confidence because that's going to give off a certain persona and or vibe, right? And then, of course, the way you are speaking and carrying out your speech, that is the wavelength or the frequency or the output in which you are utilizing to communicate with people. So let's talk about frequency for a second. Because if you haven't seen the movie Frequency, they talked about it in there a little bit. They tapped on it when they were talking about waves and things like that, radio waves. And if you've ever been in science class, you could see there's gamma rays and then there's radio waves and all these other things on the spectrum. So if I were to draw, right, a wave on here, right? And then I were to go ahead and cut it in half, just slash it right in half, and then bring it across. Here's your M, right? That's your M, and then this would be your W, right? Now, it doesn't matter whether you are male or female. If I were to play the right song at the right time in the right setting, you would all pick up on the wavelength, especially if you liked the pitch, the tone, and the vibe of the atmosphere, right? This is also tapping into, well, what's known as our universe, right? Because our universe operates through frequency, sound, and vibration, right? At least that's what Nikola Tesla said. So when we're talking about these things, and if you remember my last lesson, I talked about wordplay. And I'm going to be tapping on a couple things here, including the spiritual aspect, because this is all about creativity, logic, art, science, and spirituality. And if you saw lesson 3, I'm very big on the last 2 things working together to stop a lot of other bad things from happening. So it was said that, for instance, Hitler, right? He had what's called as the spear of destiny, the spear that pierced the side of Jesus Christ. However, a spear can also be known as a pike. It can also be known as a lance. It just depends on the shape of the weapon that is being, utilized. However, back then they had lances, they had spears, they had pikes. So if they never actually had, or I should say if Hitler never actually had what was known as the spear of destiny that pierced the side of Jesus Christ, then everything that he was doing and everything that was happening in his own mind. And if you've ever seen Hitler give speeches, sometimes his hands would be jittery and he'd be shaking. And then, of course, if you study history, sometimes he would mess with narcotics and things like that. So you have to understand the dynamics of terminology when you're utilizing them and you're trying to understand the world around you. See, one could say that you have potential. But if you don't believe in yourself, then no action will occur, and therefore no result will ever be achieved because no action was ever taken. So if you study people like performance coaches, and I think Tony Robbins was the first person to come out with this whole circle thing, it's potential, belief, potential, action, results, right? And it goes in this little circle, right? So you have your belief, you have your potential, you have your action, you have your result, right? And this looks very familiar as far as cash flow quadrants, if you ever read the book Rich Dad, Poor Dad, because you have in the Rich Dad, Poor Dad, you would have your employees, your small business owners, your business owners, and then your investors. Well, your investors always look for results, right? Your employees always look for some type of action. And then, of course, to work at the company or to start a small business, you need some type of belief, right? But the only way you're going to take any of those steps is with some type of potential. And that means that you are trying to see if it's worth it. And if you're in business, which would be at the top right, I think, in the cash flow quadrant, you would need to see the potential of the employee as they take action to bring your belief up that they were able to do it. And then that goes into a full circle. And now remember, in the beginning, I said one line could turn a negative into a positive. So when we're looking at the results section, let's say you get a negative result. Well, you don't try the same thing again the same way. You change it, right? And the way you would change this is if you would add another line. So if I add another line and now I get a positive result, this whole thing will start to snowball and it will continue to get momentum as you get positive reinforcement, as they say in psychology, because in psychology there is negative reinforcement and then there's positive reinforcement. What do I mean by this? Well, to reference a sports analogy again, if you're into horse racing, they say you could get the carrot or the stick, right? And so one of the interesting things was I saw a gentleman, he did a cartoon and he was like, the carrot or the stick, why not use both? And he tied the carrot to a stick and held it out in front of the horse. And the horse kept chasing after the carrot, getting it to run faster. However, it never got the carrot. Now, when the wind pushed back and it reached optimal speed, it was able to take a bite out of the carrot, so on and so forth. So it was able to train the horse correctly. So these are some of the things that I want you to pay attention to when you're trying to understand somebody. Don't just dangle something out in front of them and hope that they run towards it, because they may not know how to get there. They may not know exactly what you're trying to get them to do. Instead, help guide them to the location or help guide them to the end result. Don't just assume that they're going to know how to get there because of whatever you've been told, right? So, what I mean by this, and this is the most beautiful thing ever, I've heard several quotes, and this is one that stands out to me. The first one is that the eyes are the windows to the soul. Well, if that's the case, then the ears are the gateway to the mind. And what I mean by that is, if you say things like affirmations, if you sing songs, if you listen to music, and you repeat these things over and over again, you start to tend to emulate the things that you listen to, the stuff that you hang around, and the things that you see. This is why I say that children are not born assholes. It's a learned behavior. It's a learned behavior based upon the way their parents acted, the way their environment treats them, the way they see things in their world, so on and so forth. So you have to take things with a grain of salt, right? Or a grain of sand. And this brings me to my next quote, which was from Tomb Raider's Lara Croft, right? I don't know if I forgot which one it was, if it was Cradle to the Grave or whatever it was called. But Lara Croft Tomb Raider, if you remember this, to see a world in a grain of sand and heaven in a wildflower, to hold infinity in the palm of your hand and eternity in an hour. Now, time is the most valuable commodity that we can ever possess, and most people waste it doing so much for others trying to survive that they don't do stuff for themselves. And this is very true. You know, I looked at it up online. You could go ahead and Google check and fact check me. You can look at some of the teachings from great coaches and things like that. People in business, they will tell you that people are more inclined to do for others than they are willing to do for themselves. In other words, are you practicing what you preach, or are you just preaching to practice? So these are the things that I want to tap on, especially in this lesson. Now, I'm going a little quick here because not only am I pressed for time, but I do want to get this across to you because I do know that you don't have hours upon hours to watch this information and get everything out. So I will be having a private session set up if you are interested, so on and so forth. But getting back into everything, Warren Buffett once said that time is the most valuable commodity that we can never buy more of, and that's very true. And the purpose of this lesson is to show you that you can pay attention to things. You just have to understand everything that you're paying attention to. For instance, you may say, I'm wearing a white shirt with white text that says hustle on it. But if you want to be, specific, you would pay attention more closely. In other words, if you ever seen the movie Now You See Me, it says, get close. No. Get real close, right? And the reason why is because I want you to get close so you can see all the other letters in the word, right? There's other words on top of it. So how many ways can you actually say what it is that I'm wearing, right? Oh, he's wearing a black shirt with white lettering that says hustle, but the words are making the word hustle, and it sounds very confusing, but in actuality, it's a creative entendre, right? Because it's showing you that there's many ways to say something. There are many labels out there, but which ones do you identify with? Because that is what's going to bring meaning to you, and that's what's going to capture your attention. And the whole purpose of this lesson is to actually talk about attention hacking, something I came up with years ago when we entered the attention economy. So, what does it mean to pay attention to understand? Well, actually listen to what someone is saying and then use their words like keywords online to get their attention, right? And so once you get their attention, you need retention. So you want to utilize these keywords. Think of it like SEO, right? If you're going to search for a healthcare provider, you're not going to just put hospitals around me, although you can, and then you can so on and so forth. But if you have a specific illness, you may put cancer doctors around me or cardiovascular doctors around me. And you would be more specific because you would utilize the keywords to tell the algorithm, I'm looking for this specifically. Same thing works for human beings. You can utilize their language and then say things like, hallelujah. And now you know, oh, that person either is a spiritual person or a religious person or whatever. And it's not until you get into the weeds and start having a conversation with them that you understand that maybe they just like singing or saying the word hallelujah, or maybe they just like singing, or maybe they just like sports references like I used in this video, so on and so forth for class. Or maybe they're all about acronyms because, they came from a different background. And these are the things you have to understand and be flexible with when it comes to communication with other individuals and trying to develop a relationship and rapport with them if you're, trying to influence or befriend the other person. Now, when it comes to this takes time and effort. And time plus effort equals valued attention. Meaning, if you spend time on YouTube, the social platforms, and things like that, that's your time. You're taking effort out of your day and time out of your day, and you're paying attention to something that's more valuable to you that you are choosing to consume. This is why people will trade money, because it costs us both time and effort, and it's valuable, so on and so forth. So we use money as an exchange or as a form of exchange of valuable attention, or sometimes called just value, right? I like this marker. I have cash in my pocket, so I'm going to give you money so I could buy a bunch of these markers so I can do this lesson. That's a simplistic way of putting things, but it's in actuality, it's true. You need a house. Well, you need money for a house, so I go to the bank to get money to give it to somebody else so I could achieve obtaining a home, etc., so on and so forth. So let's get into attention hacking. So why hack attention? Well, if you are trying to help someone, you can break through the noise in their mind by stating terms so that something clicks within their mind so that you can now have their attention and they go, oh, click, I got it. All right, what are you trying to tell me now? So this is where the whole thing comes into place, right? Now, the format I'm going to follow comes from Simon Sinek, The Golden Ratio. So I started with why. Now we're going to go into how, right? So how to hack attention. In order to hack attention, you must know the keywords or the words and terminology important to people that they use on a readily, consistent basis, right? The words that they use, and they're able to speak with conviction because they're able to put confidence behind their speech, right? So you can do something like that and use it like a password on a laptop, if that's the best way, right? Because the only way you're able to get into a laptop and spend time on it is first you have to enter the password or the keyword, right? So what's the password, right? So this brings us back to why hack attention. I'm trying to get your attention, so I'm going to need the password. Oh, here's the password. Boom, I got your attention. Now we're in, right? Now the next step would be, what is attention hacking? Well, attention hacking is to get through to somebody that you must be, to get them, how do I say this? In order to get through to someone, you must be attentive to their words and past explanations to get a full picture of what's in their mind. So if you're trying to help somebody, you have to understand what is in their mind, what is their thinking procedures like, what are they trying to do? Are they trying to manipulate, deceive, or are they actually trying to influence and help? Because there is a fine line between the two. Now, when you're talking about things like spirituality, it does upset most people. Now, the question is, why? Well, the reason why is because they have assigned terminology and terms to them that trigger them. If you watch shows like Fresh and Fit on YouTube or other channels and things like that, they may use a word called triggered. And triggered is just a way of saying, oh, I said a key word that's going to get you to be emotional right now. Now, if you remember the last class when we were talking about the differences between emotion and logic, people will do a lot of things based on emotion and then justify with logic later. The same thing goes for, spending money. People will spend money emotionally and then justify it with logic later. So for instance, I'll use this story. I have a younger brother that wants to get a BMW. And he's 16 years old, and I'm totally going to use this. Emotionally, because of his environment and everything else, it behooves him to get the BMW because it'll make him stand out and it'll bring attention to him, which is what everybody's pretty much striving for. If you haven't figured that out by now, go on Instagram, go on TikTok, and look at what people are doing to get attention. Now, when you ask him why did he get that car, he will make up some logical statement as to why he needed that specific car instead of getting a Honda Civic and, working your way up from there. However, when I was younger, I wanted a fast car because I grew up in the Fast and the Furious era. So I liked the speed, I liked the racing, I liked the drag racing aspect, the rally cars, and so on and so forth. So I was more into that. However, he's more into the luxury side, and I told him from personal experience, when I was in the military, I had an Audi, but I used it for Uber. And the reason I used it for Uber was because that Audi let me drive Uber Black, which made me more money than driving a standardized Uber ride. So there was always a method to my madness, whereas he, on the other hand, is just trying to get attention. And I think those are the differences between age ranges, right? Because I have mentors that are very much older than me and higher than me when it comes to education, knowledge, and wisdom. For instance, Dr. J who was one of my mentors in college. He was a former CFO of Lexington, Kentucky Banking, a former Marine Corps Raider, and Marine Corps sniper. And one of the things that he did when he took me under his wing was he started to train me a specific way. And he was actually the individual that drove me to the recruiting office so that I too can become a Marine. Now, because I looked up to him, I had different outlook on life because I sucked up all the knowledge and experience that he put me through and he gave me. And I utilized it not only in my own world, but to change the world of others. For instance, I will give this last example before we wrap up here. I remember having a Marine. Her name was Thayer. And Thayer had a mouth on her. And I said, Thayer, look, you're one of my Marines. I'm in charge of you. And the way you're speaking to people is going to get you in trouble and is going to get me in trouble. So what I want you to do is I want you to go ahead and read all of the punitive articles, so on and so forth. And then we're going to practice. And I'm going to show you exactly how to communicate to people. Say what it is that you want to say without getting in trouble. And she, pushed back a little bit. But I can tell you right now, after about a month or two and she got it down, a couple months ago, I reached out to her, said, what's up? And she said that she does the same thing now with all of her Marines because a lot of the kids coming in are running off and running their mouth in the military, thinking they could just say whatever they want without repercussion. And that's only because a lot of people, I think, honestly, I don't think a lot of people have ever been punched in the mouth for real yet, based upon things that they said. So therefore, they're never careful with their words, or they've never been punished, as they say. So they've never been careful with their words or their actions. They just had too much positive reinforcement. And as we all know, pride comes before the fall. So, positive, 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 positive. Now you're up here, and then life and things will knock you down here. But everybody wants to be up here, if you know what I mean. So, think about that when you're trying to have a communication situation with somebody, or you're trying to help somebody and things like that. Because at the end of the day, like I said in lesson 3, life is short. And if you are wondering, well, what does he mean by life is short? What is going on? I got to see exactly how short life was when I got to see exactly how quickly it could be taken away from people. So when you look at that aspect and you think, wow, this day is a gift, let me not waste it. If you think about what it is that you want to do, what you want to achieve, if you only do things when you feel like doing them, you'll never actually achieve in the time frame that you want to what it is that you want to achieve. So even on your crappy days, I implore you to go ahead, get up and do something with your life, or do something that goes towards your goals, because at the end of the day, you could not wake up tomorrow. And if that's the case, then what are you going to do today that's going to secure yourself, your family, your friends, and make you feel good about yourself? Because again, I will say this, it only takes one line to make a positive outcome, right? It takes one change to make a positive outcome. And if you don't remember lesson 3, I want to leave you with this as we wrap up. First thing I want you to do, this is going to be some homework for you. Try and listen to your environment and see how it speaks to you, and then write down what you felt and heard, such as keywords that triggered you, and triggered other people when you were in conversation with them. And then have a conversation about it with other people or the people that you've triggered so that you can have more effective communication in the long run, right? And if you haven't seen the theme or what I normally do with these things, there's normally a whole thing with C and 4 or C and 2 are the lessons, right? Well, this is C4. Now, in the military, which I did mention, I was an ammo tech and I did work with C4 and it was great and all. However, if you mention lesson 3, or I should say if I mention lesson 3 and you remember it, you remember that this whole premise was for the S and S to work together, because if you invert it, it creates 22. Now, I don't know about you, but I think it's interesting that not only does 2 plus 2 equal 4, but 2 times 2 equal 4. So, if you haven't registered that yet, think about this. In one area, it says that the Bible has 66 books, and the other area says it has 73. When you add those two things up, it also comes out to 22. So, I'll leave you with that. This is lesson 4 of class, and I hope you guys enjoyed it. I know it was a little bit all over the place and a little bit quick, but I was pressed for time, and I know you are as well, and I want to respect your time because I love all of you. So take care. Have a great day. God bless. Bye-bye. Mwah.